Get more confidence. Get that promotion. Get moving up the corporate ladder. Get a better gig with an MBA from Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Whether you're starting out or stepping up, now you can take your career to a whole new level with a full-time MBA in College Station and convenient weekend options at Houston City Center. Texas A&M has a program to suit your schedule. Visit mba.tamu.edu. And Giga Maggie.
Howdy, welcome to Mays MasterCast. I'm Shannon Deere, the Assistant Dean for Graduate Programs, here with your fabulous host, Ben Wiggins.
Good morning, Shannon. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's crazy times out there. Our hearts are with those who are, who have lost loved ones or have been laid off, what have you. And yet, it's a beautiful day in Aggie Land.
It is. It's a beautiful day in Aggie Land. I've told y'all Ryan started listening to the show. My husband, Ryan, and he listened to the first episode where Kyle did some audio engineering to the adjective I used to describe you. And he was like, I laughed out loud.
Nice.
So we'll see what Kyle does with Fabulous today.
I enjoy all times when Kyle does audio engineering with that. But I'm also glad we have approval from Clan Giraffe on the show.
Mm-hmm. I would like for it to sound like a monster truck rally most times, so I feel like I need to be like, our marvelous host, Ben Wiggins.
Revving engines in the background.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be upset about that either.
We'll see what Kyle can do with that. Good luck, Kyle. Today on the show, we are excited to welcome Eric Dunavant. Eric is a proud member of the Aggie class of 1995. He actually remembered his fish camp chant. He said, Fish Camp 91, Aggie spirit, pride and fun, all the pieces come alive, the fighting class of 95. I thought I was pretty impressed that you remembered that. Mm-hmm. Yep. And he holds a Bachelor of Science in Agribusiness and Agricultural Business Operations. And most importantly, now he is a certified financial planner and currently serves as the president of his firm, Paradiem. Paradiem guides families and businesses to be more intentional in how they live and give. I love that tagline. More intentional in how they live and give. He's also the author of What If We've Been Doing It All Wrong? Rethinking the Heart of Ownership. He really has a giving mission related to wealth and shares that in the advice that he gives to his client. He and his wife, Angel, have 3 children, Clayton, Austin, and Grayson, and they live in the New Orleans area. So we're excited to have Eric on the show.
The only thing I'm upset about is that he didn't give his book a much more aggressive title. You're definitely doing it all wrong. All the ways you're screwing it up by Eric Dunavant. I feel like that's how titles... You idiot. That's just the title. You idiot. I feel like that would sell 1 million copies for sure. You idiot.
I have a dog in the background. Don't be so stupid.
Right.
Do it right.
Stop being so dumb. Is it Rowdy or Crash in the background?
It was Crash.
Okay.
His collar was jangling. He's been terrible lately. He broke into the trash can, which is one of those in the cabinet trash cans, and somehow he pulled it open. It was completely closed. We checked it because this is the second time this has happened.
Nice.
It was completely closed, and he opened it from an entirely closed position while we were gone last night. There was a lot of aluminum foil, plastic, the works on the floor, in the kitchen, in the living room, outside. I don't even know. This kid.
Stay tuned for the release of Shannon's book entitled Crash, You Idiot.
For sure. Love him, but an idiot. Let's get into it. We're excited to have Eric on the show.
Yes, we are.
We welcome Eric Dunavant to the show. How was your weekend?
Glad to be here.
Did you have a nice weekend?
I did. It was actually a relaxing weekend. I don't know how anybody else is experiencing this, but it's hard to relax. I made a recording for some friends of mine on Friday, and I was just talking about the fact I know a lot of people who are retired and who always talk about how they're busier in retirement.
Right.
So I went into this quarantine going, I'm going to slow down. It's going to be easier. I think I'm busier in the quarantine.
I believe it. What is your favorite superpower?
The question was, could we eat without gaining weight or having to worry about it? That would be my favorite one.
Okay.
When I watch a Marvel, when I watch a Marvel movie, if I'm going to tell you, like what do I appreciate most about superheroes? I like the brains more than the brawn. So your Tony Stark, your Batman, the guys who are not necessarily enhanced in any way, but bring the brains to the game. That's my favorite superhero.
What do you like about that? I hear that argument, not an argument necessarily, but I hear that sentiment a lot. And that always kind of fascinated me. What is it about that appeals to you?
Well, so maybe it's attainable, right? I'm never going to get injected with super serum, so, but just maybe I could see things in a world today to be able to make a difference. And so I think it's that you're a whole lot more relatable to the person who's operating with brains than the guy who's gotten some enhancement that's never even going to happen. And, the likelihood is it's not going to happen the other way either. But I think when you feel like you can relate to it and maybe you could actually put yourself in those shoes and be that person, I think that it makes it's more reality, it comes alive a little bit more.
I agree with you, Eric. Give us 60 seconds on your road to Paradiem.
Yeah, so 60 seconds would be started out at Texas A&M, moved 5 times in 2 years, landed in Phoenix, Arizona, working for Charles Schwab, was trying to get back to Texas, working for Charles Schwab, and overshot the state, landed in Louisiana, running a private client division for them, and then 9 years ago, ventured out on my own and opened up Paradiem.
What was the moment when you knew, okay, now, in terms of going out on your own?
Yeah, so 2006 was Hurricane Katrina. So we go through Hurricane Katrina, and there were really just a lot of things that I felt like I needed to be doing for families that I felt called to do. One of the things that really is important to me is helping people understand why they're doing the things that they're doing, helping them play the movie to the end. So there's always consequences to anything that we do, positive or negative. There's always a consequence to it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we make decisions financially just based on how can I get this done as quickly as possible? And we don't think out the consequences.
Right.
And one of the things that was going on in my career was it was really about what can you sell next? What can you sell next? How fast can you sell it? How fast can you get it done? And I will tell you, it was just this idea of, wait a minute, what's the consequence? What's the consequence of seeing this through? What is this going to do to families? Is it in their best interest? And it's not that they were pushing us to do things that weren't in their best interest. I just wanted to move a little slower. I wanted to take a step back and really ask questions, because what I felt like is that we would end up with completely different answers if we took the time to ask them and help them think out, why am I doing this? And what's the outcome going to be through this process? And the only way that I could see to do that. So I went up to some of the upper management and I'm like, hey, this is really on my heart. This is really what I want to do. What do you think about this? And I got some lip service. Yeah, maybe, I don't know. But then the numbers would keep coming out. Here's the numbers you need to meet to hit your targets. And I didn't have trouble hitting my targets. I was their number one representative the year before I left, thanks to Katrina and some other things that had happened. But it was, if I'm going to do this in a way that I feel best about, if I'm going to do this in a way that I think I can make a difference in the world and make a difference for families, just helping them be more intentional and help them think about, that ultimate why, which is what I would put it on, I'm going to have to go out and do this on my own. And it just took the leap. It was definitely a big leap, but I just knew it was time.
You used the word called and you said on your heart as well. And those are both phrases that we often hear in a faith context. Does that play an important part in this?
Faith is a big part of what we do. Absolutely. Yeah. Faith is a big component in my life, and a big component in kind of the reasoning behind just everything that goes on, even inside of the company. I mean, if you look at overall mission statement, it's a faith-based mission statement.
Let's back up a little bit. Where did you grow up?
Grew up in a small town outside of Lubbock, a town called Wolforth, Texas.
Okay. How many in your family?
So I had a little sister, mom and dad, and a little sister.
Okay. What was your first job?
I worked as an apprentice in the meat market at the local grocery store.
Ah.
I'd go in on Saturdays or go in the afternoons and clean up after the butcher, and then on Saturday spend a little bit of time learning how to cut meat and keep it.
Cut that meat, Peyton Manning.
That's it.
Any funny stories from that?
Well, so the funnier part is because I apprenticed as that, my wife and I had been married about a year, and I went deer hunting and brought a deer home and decided to process it in the kitchen of our brand new apartment. She likes to give me a hard time about that today. We've been married for 23 years. That was a first year marriage, and she still likes to bring that up.
Nice. What was your greatest challenge as a child?
Well, so I grew up pretty idyllic. I mean, it was a small town. I walked to school every single day, and I graduated from the same school that I started kindergarten in. My dad's veterinary practice my dad was a veterinarian. His veterinary practice was in town, and everything was good until my 8th grade year. My mom fell and broke her arm and ended up with a staph infection. And I buried my mother the day before I started my freshman year of high school.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was hard. And then, but this dovetails into the story of kind of why I do what I do today. But this led to my father filing bankruptcy in the middle of my senior year of high school.
Okay.
So, February, my senior year, we lost everything. The house that we moved into when I started high school, when I started kindergarten, we lost everything.
I'm sure that is a story that you go to, not necessarily tell the story itself, but that I'm sure that's something that motivates your desire to help families. If coming out of that and kind of understanding what happened to your family, what is a piece of advice you would give to another family to avoid that situation? Is it life insurance? Is it something else? Like what would you, if you could go back in time, what would you have your parents do differently, if anything?
So probably the easy answer is probably life insurance. I mean, that probably would have solved everything from one standpoint. My passion really is around helping business owners who are thinking about transitions. And one of the words that I like to use is this idea of how do you get off this business roller coaster? How do you get off without getting hurt? Mm-hmm. And the joke, or the phrasing that I use about my father is, and this happens to other business owners, is that many business owners are running a business and don't think about it, and they end up getting thrown off the roller coaster. That's what happened to my dad.
Okay.
He went in without a succession plan, without a plan for what's going to happen if things don't go well. I think that's always the challenge with optimists and business owners, is things are always going to go well. My dad at that point was looking to expand his business. He had borrowed some money and bought out another veterinary practice, and he was expanding. He was doing large animals and small animals, and he was looking for ways to bring other veterinarians in to practice with him. And so everything's going well. And then my mom breaks her arm, and then she ends up passing away. And all of a sudden, my dad's got to decide, am I going to run this business or am I going to be Mary Poppins? And that's not an easy decision every day. And so life insurance certainly would have helped. I think when you go back to this idea of why are you doing what you're doing and what is the most important aspect of what you're doing, it's more just taking a step back and thinking through the scenarios. And, sometimes it comes back to this idea of saying, well, yes, you should just buy an insurance policy. Okay, so here's the how. But I want to really help somebody think through the why, because when you understand the why you're doing what you're doing and you really get centered on, you understand the outcome and you understand how this engages and how this plays out and the possibilities in your life, then your ability to make that premium payment or that ability to write the legal document or do that takes on a whole new meaning, because it's not just for the how. You're not just doing it because somebody said, hey, this is something you should do. You've actually thought about, my goodness, what would it be like to play Mary Poppins in a situation where I've got children and I've lost my spouse and now I'm trying to figure out how to live life.
I'm sorry you had to go through that. That sounds like a really tough thing.
It was hard. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me. It was the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me. It completely changed the trajectory of who I was and who I am in a really, really beautiful way. because I was a mama's boy. I was, I often wonder if I would have gone to A&M if she had lived, because I don't know if I would have left home. I'm out in West Texas. Texas A&M is a long way away. It was about 8 hours away versus, my dad and I had a strained relationship. And I think some of that had to do with just these circumstances. I mean, you go back to this idea of playing out the whole movie. Do you get a life insurance policy? Maybe, but you do that because he spent years before the bankruptcy happened trying to outrun extra medical bills and work extra and work extra and work extra. And it's those type of circumstances that happen. And so I was ready to get out of West Texas when I went off to A&M versus if my mom was still living. And then there were other circumstances just along the way, but it caused me to grow up. It caused me to have to mature and to just really deal with things in a way that I don't know that I would have had to deal with them. And so again, it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, but it was also it defined the rest of my life in a beautiful way. And there's parts of me that wish I hadn't had to go through it, but there are also parts of me that can't imagine my life without it.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So in finance, an industry where emotion can have such a profound influence on decision making, especially in a situation like that, how do you help clients think rationally about situations that they A, don't want to think about, and B, once they're there, they may be anything but rational? How do you get them to, how do you frame that for them?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is just the reality of the situation. So a lot of times we try and avoid making decisions because we don't want to have to deal with the emotion, right? It's like, I'm just going to push this to the side because I don't want to have to deal with it.
Right.
The biggest challenge that I see is most people, what you don't realize is when not making a decision, now you've made a decision to ignore this.
Yeah.
So what's the consequence of just completely pushing it off to the side? And so the reframe really comes into what is the beautiful outcome? What's the outcome that you would want to have happen? So this is not an ideal situation. You're early passing. Your spouse is early passing. It's not ideal. So we understand that. But how could you live your best life if that circumstance were to happen? How could we put you in a position that we could make the best of something that's really bad? And then let's imagine and let's see how that looks and how that would play itself out in a way that you would be able to have a strong relationship with your family, that you'd be able to maintain your health, that you'd be able to, if depending on how faith plays in and out of your life. I mean, I spent many years, I just will tell you this, just really battling with my faith on why God took my mom. And so one of the things that really is true that I try and help people realize is money is not a financial decision. It is, but I mean, it's a health decision. It's a faith decision. It's a relationship decision.
Right.
And then it's a financial decision. But if you start with money as a financial decision, then you miss all the other elements. And that's the most important thing that we try and bring to it is, how would your best life look? How would the relationship with your children look? How would how would life go on? And how would you be able to function if the worst were to happen? And it's not only that, right? I mean, what do you want the best to look like? I mean, we've kind of centered on this because of my overall experience, but the other side of that is, money is this thing that moves in and out of our lives. And a comment that I make quite often is that money doesn't cause problems. Money just has the ability to reveal everything that we've been ignoring. So a lack of money or an abundance of money, either way, you usually see it on extremes. In between, it doesn't show up as much because it's just, I've got just enough to get by. But I especially saw it in our life when the bankruptcy happened. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of wealthy business owners and families and see the abundance and the things that we've ignored from a health, from a family situation, and even from a faith standpoint, all really intensify their experience in an absence or an excess of finance.
Let's talk about the other end of the spectrum, the excess of finance. What are the what are the pitfalls there? I mean, you hear about boats and jets and race horses and, bad business deals and people taking advantage, things like that. What's the thing you've seen show up a lot that people don't hear about when suddenly you have a bunch of money? What's the poor decision that you see most often?
I don't know that it's a poor decision that shows up in the abundance of money, but the revelation that shows up most of the time that I see that happens, especially like in a liquidity event with a business. So business sells and it's been worth something on paper and now it's actually worth something on the bank account.
Right.
Is the strain on the relationships that was caused in building that wealth. So say you've got typically, I don't want to pigeonhole this, but a lot of times a father who's gone and built a business, doesn't always work that way, but that's a lot of the time. They spent a lot of time every single day. I'm going to build this business. I'm building this for my family. Well, at the same time, not realizing that they've neglected the relationships. They've neglected the time that they needed to spend with the family, and missed out on things that were going on when they weren't home. Maybe just even could have been the kids playing in the backyard, could have been son coming home after breaking up with his girlfriend. I mean, sometimes it's those smaller things, just like you didn't miss graduation, but you missed the award your son got or your daughter got or something like that. And those things cumulatively I've seen build up to the point that now the money in the excess comes in and there's some frustration, bitterness, anger towards the parent. And all of a sudden the parent's like, hey, now we've got money and I've got time and I've got the ability for us to be engaged. And it's like, yeah, well, but where were you? And, expecting that that's going to be fixed automatically. And that's not the case. And a lot of times that's where we see the most healing that needs to happen is inside of the relationships.
Mm-hmm. It's that song. I think it's Harry Chapin, "Cats in the Cradle."
Yeah, I know. Absolutely.
I'm searching for it now. I don't know how old that song is, but it definitely speaks to me. I actually think about that kind of thing a fair bit. Because finding the balance can be really tricky.
I think that one of the things that I've observed, especially, so I've had a chance to work with, so you get I don't want to go boomer generation, I'm Gen X, and then kind of the millennial generation. I will tell you, one of the things that I've observed is that the Gen X generations and down, I've not seen as many millennials who've been able to build wealth, but we've worked with a few Gen X families. There is a lot more intention inside of Gen X families than there was, say, in the older generations. Almost like we felt like we were, I mean, I'm speaking from experience here because I've tried to be more intentional in my own family, but there's been times I've messed it up. I mean, my wife, I'm running my own business. It's been interesting because my wife has called me and she's like, you tell people to do this all the time and look at this in the mirror on things that I've done and things I've missed out on. But I have noticed a lot of the Gen X focused on being much more intentional with their children, with their families, to try and make up for that. And I think it's also the reason my wife has had permission to call me on it because, I've been speaking on it. I've been able to say that. And then I can course correct and go back on some of that.
Here's an interesting question. Do you think that sort of the occasional cropping up of familial neglect, especially by fathers back in those times, was something that started showing up more with the boomer generation, or was that something that had always been there and it just turned over in like the course of human history really very, very recently? Or was it something that showed up in one generation and then went away in the next because we had all of these new technological capabilities? We had just won a war in the case of when the boomers were born. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that was a new problem that we just solved or sort of solved, or an older problem that we are solving maybe?
Well, I'm gonna give you my answer in a couple of fold. I think it lasted about 3 generations. If we're going to be 3 or 4 generations is where I think that it happened. So if you go back, you'd have to go back 100 and maybe 50 years.
Yeah.
We're working on the farm or we're working in places where Johnny at a certain age goes and spends all day with his dad.
Right.
And is apprenticing or doing something like that. It's time that we moved everything into the factory and into the suburbs. When we stopped working and then dad leaves home to go to a job all day long and then comes back home, I think is where the disconnect started. Because I know my dad even telling stories of the neglect from his own father. And I think what you've had, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it was that second industrial revolution, the arrival of indoor plumbing and irrigation and things like that. That was, I would easily believe that story, that's kind of what got us to this place, and that we spent 100+ years figuring out how to solve that problem.
That's it.
It's fascinating stuff.
I mean, it's kind of interesting when you look at what's happening today, right? With this virus, how many fathers and mothers are home today spending more time, because we still are pulling parents away from their children on a daily basis to go off to work. I mean, even when we intend to be intentional, my kids spend more time with their teachers at school than they do with me. And I'm very serious about being intentional with my children and trying to create vision for them and to transform who we're going to be into the future. I'm very intentional about that. And still the society around us has created an environment that we have to fight against that.
Okay, let's see. Okay, let's talk about your book for a minute. Rapid fire, 1-sentence responses. What impact do you hope the book has on a reader?
I really want people to just stop and ask why they do what they do.
Okay. What motivated you to write the book?
The motivation was I had a mentor who showed me the different outcomes you end up with when you ask people why instead of just asking people how.
Okay. What surprised you when you were in the process of writing?
So I was surprised at how hard it was. If you let me borrow just a really quick story, there's an author by the name of Ron Blue. He's a Christian financial author. And I walked up to him. I said, Ron, I'm writing a book. He said, I'm sorry. He said, what? He goes, well, let me tell you something. It's the hardest thing you will ever do. And I've never known a man to be called to write just one book.
Okay.
So I'm in the middle of writing book 2 right now. So,
well, I don't know if that applies to comic books, but my writing partner and I just finished our first mini-series of a graphic novel.
awesome.
And we've got half an issue illustrated so far, and that's all in process. But the first miniseries is written, and I'm afraid you're right, at least in my case, because there are several more to come.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. It's really hard. What did you, other than the fact that you're called to write more than one book, perhaps, what did you learn about yourself when writing the book?
I am too much of a perfectionist. I edited and edited and edited and edited. And I found my wife was finally like, this just needs to go to publish. And I'm like, yeah, but there's just a little bit more to fix. I could probably fix 2 or 3 things inside of it today.
Right. Jim Collins says that good is the enemy of great,
Yes.
But perfect is also the enemy of great.
Totally agree.
Your book discusses the strong influence that people's worldview has on their financial decision-making and behavior. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then I have a couple of follow-up questions as well.
So when I look at my life, debt played a big role inside of it. Mm-hmm. So you can start with this worldview that debt is awful. You should never have debt. And I could get to that expression because my dad's borrowing money inside of his business, and my dad's just experience with debt led to bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't good. On the flip side of that, there are times if you want to buy a house, you probably need to borrow money. And I've expanded my own business, having learned lessons from him along the way, using debt and acquiring another business partner. And so depending on the worldview, you could come from a worldview of a family who's been very intelligent and careful about how they've borrowed money and have success with it. You could come from a family who has a worldview that you stay completely away from it or that it can only do damage, and you will end up at two different conclusions. I mean, those are one tool that, depending on the worldview and what you experienced, end up with an outcome. But I will tell you, the one that probably becomes the most obvious to me, that I talk about a little bit inside of the book, that has been the greatest impact as we've had conversations with families, especially if we're talking about what's the impact and what, if you're going to be intentional with your family, what's the outcome that you're going to end up with when you build your wealth. It comes around inheritance. So there seems to be a worldview that has been brought into current time that you get as much of your wealth to your kids as you can. You do it equally, and you do it after you pass away. So those three rules, no matter who I talk to in the professional community, seem to just kind of resonate and echo over and over and over again. And the challenge, again, if we come back to an excessive amount of wealth, is let's play the movie out. So what does this do from a motivation standpoint? What does this do from, and if you look at the statistics, I mean, 90% of family wealth doesn't make it past 3 generations anyway.
Yeah.
And so statistically, we're setting all of these families up to fail. One of the questions that I even ask in the book, and I think that's encouraging to ask the families, is, okay, so what's the consequence, or what do you want to have happen? What's the outcome that you'd want this inheritance to happen? So first being this idea of an inheritance going after you pass away. And for families who have the ability, one of the strong things we encourage them is shift your worldview and look at, when will your children most likely need assistance? I mean, if we look at the average lifespan right now, what are you going to live until 90? Maybe someone in the family is probably living until 90. And so they'll inherit the money when they're 70, 65. They've lived their full life. And after they've accumulated their own wealth, you're going to give them even more wealth. I don't know. Maybe. But that's the idea, the concept that we've given right now. Versus your children that you love probably need assistance. I mean, most families will pay for college, but maybe they need assistance kind of getting started and starting a family and, raising their kids. That's when they really need the help. So if you had the ability to think about how to strategically give them that inheritance, you're there to walk alongside them. You're there to walk along and give them wisdom and build relationship inside of passing that inheritance while you're giving it to them. You get to see how well they do with it. I mean, if they do really well with it, maybe you want to give them some more. If they,
I was going to say, I don't want wisdom. I want bottles up in the club. No, just me.
Yeah, just you, right. Huh? Now you get off at another tangent. You don't give anyone, and that'd be one of our piece of advice that we've learned along the way, is you don't give people much of an inheritance in their 20s. Wait till they're 30.
Yeah,
there's just some maturity that happens in their 20s.
Yeah, less bottles up in the club after that.
A lot less bottles up in the club. A lot more bottles up in the nursery.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I got one over in the other room. I hope you guys aren't hearing her yelling right now, because she is yelling.
Oh, that's cool. I have it. Parents always seem to me to be more self-conscious of their own kid yelling than most everyone else is.
With the exception of airplanes, for some reason,
true.
I don't know. Airplanes are where the magic happens in a bad way for crying children. I don't know what the deal. Some of it's the air pressure and stuff like that, but I don't know. There's some kind of witching hour that happens with little kids on airplanes,
especially on a red eye.
Yeah. International flights are the best too.
They are.
You were saying?
No. So if a lifetime inheritance allows parents to walk alongside their children, I mean, a really beautiful way. If they're bottles up in the club, then that's probably it, right? But if they're mature in how they handle it, maybe they start a business. But there's the ability to give counsel along the way. The other thing is this equality issue. And I'm not against equality, but what if you've got one child who is a doctor and a physician or a computer scientist or something and bringing down a lot of money, and another one who has chosen to be a teacher?
Yeah.
Is the amount of inheritance that you're going to leave, does it need to be equal? Maybe it does, but there at least deserves to be some discussion around where the need is and who that is. And so it's really, the worldview issue is just really about challenging the norms of what you already believe, asking the questions from a different perspective, and making sure that the answer that you come up with is really what you thought it was going to be. It's going to really create the result that you originally wanted. And that's really what the entire idea of the worldview questions are. Sometimes we're so quick to make a decision on something. Are we stopping to even ask if this is what we really intended?
You said, waiting till people are 30. What about a process in stages? Is there some value to that part of it? Or what other pieces of, like, that's a good tip. Like, wait until your kids are, if you're going to, help your kids come into some of the money that you've made while you are still alive, wait until they're 30. Are there any other things that sort of coalesce into a nice little nugget like that?
Well, so I wish that I could say this is all my original research, but it's not. So there's a great book written called Raised Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise.
Oh.
And inside of that book, they did a lot of research with families who successfully were able to transition some wealth to the next generation. And it wasn't simply waiting till 30 was one, but the other piece was really making the heirs feel like they were on their own. There were no bailouts waiting on them when they were in their 20s. Because the freedom to fail, but knowing that you're responsible for your own failure, really matters.
Yeah.
There's something about that time. I mean, I remember being in my 20s and just having a lot of dreams and ambitions of different businesses that I wanted to start and things that I wanted to do. But this entire idea of no one's coming to save you if you mess it up causes you to make some different decisions. But we've also worked with some families. I can tell you story of family after family I'm thinking of, a scenario where business failure after business failure after business failure because mom and dad just came and bailed them out each time.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than thinking through the business plan or thinking through what they were going to do, there were not consequences for the failure.
Right.
So that becomes a second piece that's really important.
Yeah, there is maybe no greater education than the feeling of the walls closing in. I remember that feeling well from my first summer in Los Angeles. What thoughts do you have on utility curves as it comes to finance? So do you think that people's utility or satisfaction with their situation rises sharply as we climb up to a certain amount of income, then flattens out quickly after that? Some have said, I think Shannon might have said this on intro outro in a recent episode, that it actually goes down at a certain point. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I definitely think that happens if we're talking about accumulation. But, and I've got a big but on this, generosity changes everything.
Okay.
So when you can get someone to see that the world is bigger than themselves, when a focus is outward instead of inward, then the accumulate. So I come back to this idea of if I accumulate more and I accumulate more, I get to a point that there's no more satisfaction. I don't have any more joy that I have, 10 million instead of 9 million, maybe in this example. And at some point there becomes what I've actually seen for people who are just accumulating for the sake of accumulation is this idea that there's frustration over the things you have to take care of and the things that you're responsible for as you accumulate more and more and more. So I could definitely see the utility curve, this idea of things going down after a certain amount of accumulation. I definitely agree with that. Was it Vanderbilt who made the comment, how much is enough? And his comment was just a little more. And I've seen that echoed. I just can't have enough. Change the equation though. And this has been our experience, especially from a faith-based standpoint of helping families look at, and this is really when it comes down to, you get down to the central idea of the book is on this idea, which is with the right worldview, what you begin to understand is there is a point where you have enough. There is a point where your children have enough. And at that point, if both of those two things are true, then what are you going to do with what's left over? If you're simply going to accumulate it for the sake of accumulation, then I do think that you watch satisfaction and your ability to enjoy that go down. But now, what if we could use that to make a difference in the world? What if we could create a cause where together as a family, we could be intentional about what we're doing and we could transform something for this generation, for the next generation, and for generations to come? And now we all get behind that cause and we get excited about that cause. And maybe it's multiple causes. I mean, the idea and one thing that we've seen inside of families is come together and just create things that create unity. And so we have had families who've had 2 or 3 causes, because as the family breaks out and says, well, you know, we're excited about this and we're excited about this, but everybody coming together behind this generosity component makes a huge amount of difference, because all of a sudden I'm not accumulating for the sake of me. Now I'm accumulating for the sake of others. So the more that I accumulate now becomes not about me raising my lifestyle, but about what I can do with what I've just accumulated more of to make a difference in the world.
It's a beautiful thing.
It's been awesome.
What's the best story that you have about something that has gone that way?
There's a family out in Colorado who multi-generational manufacturing business.
Yeah.
Huge heart for generosity.
Uh-huh.
And we were working with this and 4 sons, and one of the sons passed away in the middle of us working with them.
Yeah.
And there was a summer camp that they always went to. And it took a few years for all of this to develop. It didn't develop quickly. But the family rallied around the idea of building a chapel at the summer camp to honor their brother and son that had passed away.
Yeah.
And you would say, okay, so it's just, in one sense, you'd say it's just a building, it's a chapel, it's a summer camp. It's not used all the time. But I could tell you the healing that happened as the family made the gift, as the walls went up, as the building was completed, as the building was dedicated. All of that giving and generosity and pouring out actually in turn healed the family during that time. And that, you know, to watch generosity and to watch the ability of that to heal a family is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
What types of financial goals do you feel like are most effective? Or conversely, do you feel like there are types of financial goals that are not effective? I mean, they always tell us goals should be SMART, you know, specific, measurable, etc. Beyond that, what are good goals and what are bad goals when it comes to finances?
I really think the most important part when it comes to financial goals is something that you can actually connect and relate to. So what I mean by that is a lot of times how old are you?
38.
38. So let's set a goal for how much money you're going to have when you're retired, right? Retirement, and maybe that relates to you, but I find for a lot of people that's harder because it's farther off than, you know, if it's 65 or 70 or whatever age that's going to be. It's so much farther off, it's harder to think about. And I know that there's it's certainly that you need to be doing some of that now, and there's the compound interest. And I'm kind of, in one sense, I like to think of myself as the anti-financial planner, because there are a lot of moments that are within grasp, that are right in front of us, that we need to take advantage of. Sometimes, I love Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey has had a big effect on my life, especially from a getting out of debt standpoint. But I'm not going to miss taking my kids on vacation so that I can have a better retirement in 30 years. I'm not. I'm going to take my kids on vacation and I'm going to build the memory, and maybe I'm going to work 5 extra years. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the most important thing when it comes to setting financial goals, is something that you can actually relate to, something you can connect to, and something that you can feel is attainable. So one of the things that's really been important for us is there are longer term goals, but we always try and break things down into when we're building it. So let's say we're at the very beginning of putting together a plan for a family. We'll put 3 months, 6 months, 1 year sprints on there so that it's things that we can be working towards on a regular basis. What are we just trying to do for the next 3 months or the next 6 months? And that's one of the things too, I think, about goal setting, is a lot of times we set these crazy goals and we put them out there and they're really far out there and we don't ever course correct. We don't ever think about them again. And so, I'm certain you're aware that, even a plane flying from LA to Hawaii who's on master control is off track 2 to 3% of the time, and it's just constantly making adjustments. So that's the same thing, is what are the things that we can do, maybe we want to accomplish over the long term, but what are the short-term things we can do that we can really connect with? What are the things that we can do that are relatable to us? And maybe it's just, we want to make a gift to this organization this year. Or maybe it's, we want to go on a vacation with the kids this year and we want to build some memories. And maybe it's, I want to get a little bit of money into the college fund, but it's trying to pull it back to what are bite-sized chunks that I can do on a regular basis. But if all you put that into, I'm going to come back to what I said earlier, if everything is financial, then I think the joy of it goes away. So how do I relate this to building memories and relationships with my kids? How do I relate this to being here longer physically to be able to spend time with them? How I'm taking care of my body and how I'm living healthy and how we're living healthy as a family? How do I relate this to building my faith? All of those three components have to relate back financially. Otherwise, my experience is it won't happen.
Right. Is it Simon Sinek then? Is it start with why?
Absolutely.
Okay. What does it mean to maximize business value? What does it mean when a business is not maximizing its potential?
Yeah, so again, it's going to come back and you might say, is this financial? And it's, at the end of the day, maximizing business value is about reaching the potential of what the business could be doing. And so some of that could be profitability, but also some of that could be, what's the satisfaction of your employees? What's your retention level and how happy are they at being there? What's the core value and mission of the overall company, and how are you moving towards actually accomplishing and achieving that? And is it a mission that everybody gets behind, or is it some words on the wall, that you wrote 10 years ago and have never come back to?
Yeah.
What are you doing to be engaged with the community that you've been called to, and make a difference within that community? Is it financial? Is it through time? And then I think at the bottom line, you can look and see what happens. But I always, inside of our business, I've got 2 measurements that I keep every single year. The first measurement is, one of the things that we try and help families do, come back to this idea of, at some point you have enough, at some point your kids have enough. And so what we are measuring is, how much money did we show people that they had more potential to give away that they didn't realize that they had? Because I keep coming back to this generosity. Generosity changes the equation. So if we can show people that they have more generosity potential inside of themselves, then they have a chance to make a difference for their generation and generations to come. So that's the first thing, is how much generosity do we show families that they had the ability to increase that they didn't know they had the ability to increase without changing lifestyle or anything. And then the second thing that I measure, we take 10% of our gross profits and put them into an employee giving fund so that our employees are actively giving back into the community. It's one of the core values that go on inside of our company. And this generosity is not just something that we talk about, we actually have to live it. So those are the 2 things I measure. How much money did we show people that they could give away that they didn't know they had the potential last year? And then how much did our employees give away through our employee giving fund? And with those 2 measurements, what I've found is if I measure those 2 things, I maximize my business value. Everything else works out. It sounds kind of crazy, but my employees are more generous. They're more excited to come into work. They're more engaged in what they do. They're more excited about helping families because the families are out making a difference. And I think that exact same equation works maybe not in the exact same formula, but that formula works for other businesses that are out there, because life was meant to be lived to transform something. Life was meant to be lived to be intentional about what we're doing. We're not here to go through this halfway. And that's what, it is about why, but it's about discovering why so much to the point that you come alive on wanting to make a difference with that why.
You've mentioned generosity several times. It's kind of a recurring theme here. What are your favorite causes?
I love Mercy Project, who happens to be located there in College Station.
Well, yeah, they're a friend of the show for sure.
Yeah, no, I love what Chris is doing over there. I've known Chris for probably, it feels like 10 or 11 years now. We got the opportunity to support Mercy Project early on, and just big fans of what they're doing. My other favorite is a group out of San Diego called Amor. Amor builds homes for the poorest of the poor in Tijuana, Mexico. And you call it a home, we would call it a shed. It's a slab of concrete with 4 walls built up around it. But the reason that I love what Amor does is they allow you to go and get engaged, and actually you can build a home in 3 days. And so about 8 years ago, we were looking for a way to get our family engaged in generosity and get our hands dirty and experience that. And the minimum age to go on a trip with Amor is 3 years old. So we had the opportunity at that time. My youngest was 7. We couldn't find anyone else who would let us take a 7-year-old on a mission trip and let us go out of country. And so it became this experience. We went down to Tijuana. We slept on the ground, pit toilets, bucket showers, and just building a home for someone else. And after that entire experience, my 7-year-old daughter, we're getting on the bus to come home, looked up at me and said, "Daddy, we're coming back next year, right?" And so who knows what will happen this year. This would be year 8 that we would be going back if we were able to go this summer. And we've had the opportunity to take a lot of other people with us and expose them to that. And I like to tell people, if you've ever thought about going out of the country or doing this, it's a great starter trip, because you're 30 minutes from the border. If something goes wrong, you can get back home. You've got the ability to, it's everything. You've got also the opportunity to experience poverty in a way that you would never see inside of the United States. And so between what the work that Mercy Project's doing to free children from slavery in a sustainable way, which is what I love about them, is it's not simply just taking kids out of slavery who then get sold back into slavery. It's a sustainability of what Chris has built inside of that model that I love about Mercy Project. And then the ability to go get my hands dirty with Amor, with those two. Those are 2 of my favorites.
Excellent. Let's move to some more rapid fire. What do you consider your most valuable failure?
So I was in the band at A&M, and due to some things that happened, I had to miss the 2nd semester of my freshman year, which cost me the opportunity to make bass drum. Was a drummer, which also cost me the opportunity to be bugle rank or drum major. And that's probably the second most beautiful thing that happened, because I was already full of myself at that point. And if I had made bass drum and then moved on to bugle rank or drum major, my head would have been even bigger. I've been married to my wife for 23 years. I half jokingly say I believe that if I would have achieved that, I probably would have been divorced 2 or 3 times. I mean, it humbled me in a really, really good way. It was one of the worst things that ever happened.
What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
That I run 100% of the time. I can go 100% for about 80% of the time, and then I crash. That's why when you asked about this weekend was about rest. I've been going 100% of the time, but I do have to throttle it back. I think a lot of people think that I can just go.
If you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be?
Simon Sinek was my first choice, but he's younger than I am. So I'm like, is that a mentor?
Could be.
Okay. And then I jumped over to Truett Cathy, who started Chick-fil-A. I love the model of that. You go back to kind of everything I talked about. How do you maximize business value? Truett really did that really well with what he built inside of Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A's, I definitely respect the business. Chick-fil-A is a little bit of a complicated one for me for reasons that are probably obvious and we can get into later.
Right.
But definitely respect the business for sure. And I love that they say "my pleasure."
Yep.
That I lived in Atlanta for a little while, and there it's all over the place. And it in Chick-fil-A in general it is, but I love those two words. My pleasure.
Yeah. No, my pleasure is awesome.
What is the most important advice you would give to yourself exactly 5 years ago? More bottles up in the club?
More bottles up in the club. You will get through this.
Oh, okay.
There were some times where there's been some rough times the last 5 years. There's been some tough times financially. There's been some tough times emotionally. There's been some tough times relationally over the last 5 years. And, some days moving forward is about getting up and just taking the next step, right? And so that would be it. Because there were some dark days. So being able to go, you know what, you're going to get through this and it's going to be okay, even in those days where you're like, I don't know how.
What is the book you've given most often as a gift? Or if you're not a book giver, what is the book you've recommended most often?
Okay, so you guys are going to get tired of this, but I'm going to give you two answers. So the gift I've given the most often, the book I've given as a gift most often is The Ultimate Gift by Jim Stovall. Have you read this book?
I have not.
No, it's a fascinating book. My only warning to you if you get a copy is if you're going to start it, be prepared to finish it, because he's a great author from a standpoint of he writes a great cliffhanger at the end of the chapter.
Okay.
And then you're like, well, I'll just read the next chapter. And the next thing you know, you've been up all night reading this book. It's about a guy who is set to inherit a whole lot of money, but to keep him from being overwhelmed by the money, his grandfather sets up a bunch of challenges that he has to go to in order to receive the inheritance. So on everything that you've experienced from the way that I look at life, you can understand why that's been a great book. But having said that, Simon Sinek's latest book, The Infinite Game, only came out in November. And so the only reason I haven't given out more copies of it is because it just came out in November. And it's new. The best book I've read in the last 10 to 15 years.
What's the big insight from that book?
Well, so the entire idea is that you can live life one of two ways. You can live it as a game that's meant to be won. So it's a finite game and you win or you lose. Or you can look at life as an infinite game, a game that goes on forever. So your job is not to win or lose. Your job is to do the best you can until it's your turn to turn it over to someone else. And that's really in the idea of wealth and generosity and everything that we do. It's the entire mindset of what Paradiem has been built around, which is what I love about it, because my control of wealth, whether I want to think about it or not, is finite. It will end at some point. And I can try and control things beyond the grave or whatever, but at some point my control ends. So if I've been entrusted with something, then what can I do to prepare the next generation? And what can I do to make them ready to receive what I'm going to give to them? And I keep coming back to the generosity standpoint, because what I've found, my personal experience is generosity is the greatest training wheels. I mean, you were asking me about what the greatest gift was, and I told you about the chapel that got built. But on the other side of that, the most beautiful gifts that I see given are sometimes the smallest. So one of the things that we encourage families to do on an annual basis at Christmas is get together with their families. And if you've ever seen those catalogs that have like chickens and, soccer balls and things like that you can buy for people in poorer areas, in poorer countries. So like a catalog comes and it's full of a tent or a water filter or things like that. And give to your family, give each child in your family or each member of your family $100 and let them go through the catalog and pick out what they would want to give, and then actually make the gifts together. As crazy as it sounds, that has been one of the most enriching things that I've seen that's helped people kind of shift their focus from a generosity standpoint. One of the most transformational experiences for a very small investment. And so being able to watch people embrace that and realize, hey, this opportunity, this one little exercise of showing somebody how to think about how to take $100 and make a difference for someone else is the training wheels for how I might bless them further on in their life. And we've just watched that happen over and over again, and it's been beautiful.
If you could have a billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
So I love Mahatma Gandhi's quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world."
That's a good one. What is your fondest memory of TAMU?
Marching on Kyle Field. That is a nighttime game, walking into a 4-way cross through with, I guess there were only about 70,000, 80,000 fans when I was there. That's pretty magical.
Yeah.
Pretty magical.
I've got, I worked with the coaching staff for a couple of years, and I've got some good memories at Kyle Field too. My funniest Kyle Field memory is, so I don't know, you may already know this, but when they saw the horns off, the press box shakes. And so we had an older coach on our staff in 2006. His name is Bill Clay. And so when the press box started shaking, when they saw the horns off, he throws his hands out to either side, like he's kind of in a corner of our little coach's box. He throws his hands out to like the walls. And he says, "It's an earthquake."
This is his first time experiencing it?
Yeah, it was his first time up there.
That's hilarious.
So we end each session with good bull. Do you have anyone you would like to send some good bull?
Yeah, so I'm part of a CEO forum called C12 out of the Fort Worth area. I fly to Fort Worth. Well, when I can, I would fly to Fort Worth once a month to meet with the CEO forum. The head of my forum is Joe Peterson. And Joe is probably the example of fantastic customer service beyond anybody I've ever seen. That man will sit down and write a card to thank you for calling him. You know, he's just one of the most generous and kindest men that I've known. And just a great example to me, one of those people who is so awesome at it that he challenges you to be better, right? You know, so you look at his example, it's like, man, I need to be more like Joe. I need to do more of that.
I like it. Joe Peterson, you said?
Joe Peterson.
Joe Peterson. Good bull to you, Joe. Eric, good bull to you as well. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us and talk a little bit about your story.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a good time.
We hope you enjoyed the show. For our MasterCast top 3 takeaways, I wanted to start with what I felt like was really the theme of the show, which is shifting our worldview about inheritance, which is a very touchy topic for some people anyway.
Sure is.
My one side of my family, my mom's side of the family, does not talk about dying or stuff after someone dies ever. I think I've said this on the show before. And then my dad's side of the family, they would put sticky notes on stuff with their names on it that they wanted when that person died. So somebody would like walk around the house and be like, "Oh, I want that." And they put their name on a sticky note under the china cabinet or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was totally normal. That was fine. I mean, it was not normal, P.S., but it was totally fine. No problem. No one thought that was super weird.
Stay tuned for the release of Shannon's next book entitled "You're Going to Die for Sure."
Sticky note it up. Let them know what you want.
Right.
Because the rest is going to a landfill.
It's the sequel to Crash, you idiot.
But people don't like talking about it.
Yeah.
But planning for it is important. And I thought his shifts about our views or paradigm related to inheritance were really interesting. Like asking the question, should we really wait until we die to start giving our inheritance, or when our beneficiaries need it the most? So I thought that part was really interesting. A couple of other things he talked about was we need to wait until they're 30 because people are not that responsible with money in their 20s.
Bottles in the club.
Yeah, y'all really nailed that bottles in the club bit.
I'm proud of myself. Very pleased.
I thought you were. You were pleased. I'm sure Maddie would be too.
I'm glad I'm here.
Pleased with you. Yeah. But I don't know. What did you think about the providing inheritance when beneficiaries need it the most versus waiting until end of life?
it's a great idea and it makes total sense. Think about the internal thought process for someone who is later in life, who's eventually going to bequeath a ton of money to their kids all at the same time. How sad are your kids going to be? On the one hand, mom, dad, whoever is no longer with us. On the other hand,
here comes the money.
Here we go. I'm rich. Like,
That's horrible.
Yeah, it is horrible. But on the other hand, like
Ben's book, you're a jerk.
But I'm not saying that that's the way that people actually are thinking about it. But
Right.
I am saying that it really complicates the process, a process that is already complicated enough of dying for people. Because, am I actually going to be mourned, or are people going to celebrate when I pass away because now they have life-changing wealth? And it's much better to do it in such a way that you can sort of appreciate it together and you can provide some wisdom on how to handle it and, maybe do something with it together. It is definitely a game changer in terms of passing wealth along. And unfortunately, as we talk about all of this stuff, it is just another way in which wealthier families get a leg up on families that are not as wealthy. But, we're not here to tell people you have to live your life less efficiently so that, it's just part of the thing. And understanding the greater disparity that this strategy will probably create is just an important part of it.
Well, I think you said a couple of interesting things. I mean, one, we're talking about very high wealth individuals because most families don't know how much money they're going to need throughout their life. I mean, most people don't have enough money that they can give some of it away now. But for the clients that Eric has who are in that situation, I think this really changes things. Being able to give someone money when their kids are young so they can save for that money for college, for example, for their kids to go to college versus giving them that money later once their kids are out of college. It just frees them up to do so much more when they're younger with the money that they are earning versus saving it for their kids to go to college, for example. I think those things are really valuable. And like you said, getting to mentor them in the way they use that money, getting to enjoy that money together, enjoy watching them enjoy that money, all of those things would be really powerful versus waiting until later.
Yeah.
For our next MasterCast takeaway on that, I did also think it was really interesting how he said that the data shows not to provide kids bailouts in their 20s and that they need the freedom to fail, but fail with responsibility for that failure. I thought was a really interesting takeaway. I've read a couple of books lately, one by Wendy Mogul, The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. And then I heard a podcast with a woman named Jessica Leahy who wrote The Gift of Failure. And it's talking about how important it is to let children fail when we oftentimes want to help them avoid the skinned knee, but actually getting the skinned knee is really important in helping them understand their boundaries. And that's obviously for younger children, but certainly people in their 20s are still learning some of those lessons of failure and how to pick themselves back up versus having someone else pick them up.
Yeah. And one of the lessons I think that I'm actually going to suggest a subtle revision to what Eric is talking about in terms of not giving your kids any money in their 20s. I think it is a good idea to, if you can do it, to maybe give your kids a small amount of money in their 20s. And when I say small, I'm talking about like enough for them to live on for a year, maybe, but small relative to the other amounts that we might be talking about, a little piece of it so they can see how fast it can go.
Well, and I don't think that Eric was saying don't give that kind of money when kids are in their 20s.
Right.
I mean, he said pay for their college if you can pay for their college. I assume that also means pay for some of their living expenses. It might not be all of them. Work in college to make some of your living money, but then get a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think it's just that bailout money that he was saying don't do that. Don't give them major money in their 20s.
I think some kind of and this is coming from a place of privilege, but the idea of giving your kids like some sort of 5-figure sum of money, I think is kind of the right neighborhood in their 20s, because
5?
it seems
That's
like
a lot.
lot. Yeah. 5. And I mean, 4 is, but just enough that they can think this is a lot of money, and then see if they're like, if it's not handled right, it can go so fast.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I remember the first time I made real money was at PwC. And
Yeah.
it wasn't a lot of money. I don't remember the starting salaries, I think were $45,000 or something like that. And they haven't gotten a ton higher. So it's not a ton of money when you start in public accounting, but we got really big bonuses. And I mean, again, really big was like 20% of our income, but that's a lot on a percentage basis. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then we also got big raises that year. And this was 2004. So it was right when Sarbanes-Oxley was released. So we got big bonuses because we were working like crazy. But we got a big bonus and a big raise.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh man, I'm going to have a ton of money coming in. And I bought a road bike to do triathlons with. And I went to New York with some friends. And I remember, like, I ran out of money.
Yeah.
And I had a very low credit card limit. It was my very first credit card was after college that I got. And I had, maybe a $5,000 credit card limit. So again, we're not talking about big numbers here, but on a small scale, I ran out of money. And I remember, and it was a timing issue. I was waiting for that bonus check to come in, and it hadn't come in yet, and I had spent the money, and it was a good lesson that money can go really fast. And I remember my mom had to transfer $200 in my account as an adult, and I was mortified. And she was fine. She was like, I called her from New York crying on the phone, standing on the sidewalk, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. She was like, I'm sending you $200. And not that she necessarily had $200 to spare for me, but she was like, it's fine. You're going to be fine. You're going to figure this out. And sure enough, I was never going to let that happen again. So, I got responsible with the money real fast. But it was that idea that whatever it was, that $10,000 is so much money. And then you don't think about taking out taxes and then, all of that, and how expensive road bikes are and how fast that money accumulates. Those things that, whoa, okay, well, that went really fast. And I have very little to show for it.
Yep. Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Let's transition into our last takeaway. For our last takeaway, I wanted to talk about these dichotomies, sort of, or he presented them as dichotomies. There were 3 in particular that I thought were interesting. The idea of equity versus need, when he was talking about giving inheritance to kids, accumulation versus generosity, when he was talking about wealth, and then balancing retirement versus living now, when he was talking about, again, that kind of accumulation of wealth. Do you want to spend it now, or do you want to retire sooner? And I wanted to just kind of hear your thoughts on each of those.
Well, spending it now versus retiring sooner, a lot of that comes to what are you spending it on? At this moment, like if we took Brielle to Argentina, she wouldn't appreciate it. I mean, I love Brielle, but she's 7 months old. She doesn't have the perspective. I think the time they say your memory really begins at age like 3 or 4. I think it starts earlier than that. I can definitely remember stuff from when I was, I think, less than a year old, but most of our memory starts around 4. So I think from ages 4 to, until your kids are out of high school, those years are particularly important. But I think the early parts of those years are even particularly important, the ages like 4 to 10, and helping your kids get a global perspective on things and come to understand what poverty really is. And all of that is important in those years. And to understand that just because we're fortunate, that doesn't make us better than anyone else. And conversely, just because someone else has a capability that we don't have or has means that we don't have, that doesn't mean they're better than us. We're all the same in the most important ways. We're all equal. And so that is something that I would balance very heavily in terms of thinking about retirement and how to spend money now. Like those kinds of perspectives are really valuable. And then retirement, it's a tricky thing for me. I know our perspectives change on this. Right now, I think I don't ever want to retire. And I have a feeling that a lot of people feel that way at this age, but that might change.
Yeah.
That my mind, I know enough to know my mind may change on that.
Yeah, I don't know on that. I go back and forth some days. Depends on how good the day is.
Right.
I want to retire now.
Right.
No. Most of the time, though, I get a lot of anxiety if I really think about retirement. Like,
Yeah.
I do not want to do that. I was running the other day and I was like, I never want to retire. Then I was like, why am I even thinking about this? I've got a really long time.
The second sequel to Crash, you idiot. I never want to retire.
I never want to retire. But I was like, I mean, yeah, there's something about that. I think, though, a lot of people find purpose outside of work in retirement, and you and I would stay busy even if it wasn't the working side of things. So
that's the truth.
I remind myself of that sometimes. But I do think there is this major issue of balancing retirement versus living now. And Ryan and I have chosen to prioritize experiences over all else. So, and that was kind of what you were saying with thinking about how you spend your money is what are the experiences that you can give yourself, you and your partner, you and your children? What experiences can you give? I've been using this cool app called You Need a Budget, just for those of us that are not super wealthy, need to keep a budget. But it's been really cool. You can set goals. So like we have a vacation goal for savings, and it allocates your paycheck to different categories. And so there's a category for vacation, and it's by August, I want to have X amount of money that we would need to go on a vacation, which may not be used this year, but still someday to go on a vacation. And then, it has your actual expenses, like your groceries and things like that come in periodically throughout the month. But you can set short-term and long-term goals related to how you want to spend your money, which has been kind of fun to play around with over the last few months that I've been using the app. I really like it.
I used to use Mint, and it just got really advertising heavy, so I don't use it as much anymore. Also, like my mind is on budgeting enough. I'm not good at it, but I think about it enough to overcome the fact that I'm not natively good at it, and that's kind of trained into me at this point, so I don't use Mint anymore. But for someone who's getting started with budgeting and is kind of thinking I need a budget, what tools should I use? I would probably recommend Mint. Just be prepared for a lot of advertising.
This, the You Need a Budget is a paid app. I think it's $80 a year. So there's no advertising.
Yeah.
And I've always done a budget in Excel. I mean, since the day that I had a real job, I did a budget myself in Excel, and I was really resistant to use some of the other tools like Mint and Quicken and some of those other ones because they didn't categorize the way that I wanted to. But this one, you can control all the categories, and I really like it. So it's much more automated than what I was doing in Excel. And you can set those goals a little bit easier. It's just much more dynamic than what I had in Excel. Ben, do you want to close us out with a quote?
I would love to close us with a quote, and it's a quick one. Losers quit when they fail. Winners fail until they succeed. Robert Kiyosaki.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Eric.
An MBA from Texas A&M University can take your career to a whole new level. With full-time and weekend options, Texas A&M suits your schedule. So get a better gig. Visit mba.tamu.edu.